Welcome to FP Complete. I'm Aaron Contorer. Today, we're going to be talking about DevOps. And in particular, we're going to be looking at why people use DevOps to improve the reliability of their software deployments. Today, lots of companies find themselves stuck in a mode where version 1 of their software is serving customers, version 2 is under development, but it's extremely hard to move forward from one software version to another. The reason is simple. The customers are on version 1, but all of the interesting architecture and features are being built in the new version. So what we find is that companies get stuck adding features to the first version of their software, but they've never actually gone through the process of deploying a whole new version of their software on a running system. Because everything about how the system is deployed is done manually, the system is constantly mutating and taking on new forms that it's never taken on before. One piece of software gets upgraded, then another. An old piece of cloud infrastructure receives a new deployment of software. The distributed system that people are running their applications on gets into a state which has never been seen before, which is unprecedented. When this happens, you find yourself in a situation which is neither reliable nor secure. The problem is that without automating the way we build our clouds out, we find ourselves manually cobbling together the key systems on which our businesses run. Historically, DevOps wasn't important. People in school learned to write software with the idea that everything would run on one computer, and that computer just sits there stably running whatever you've said. The truth is we've left that world years ago. We're now in a world where software is running on a large number of different machines, whether in a data center or on the cloud. And that software is many different programs running on many different computers that are quietly talking to each other under the scenes. That means that what the programmer writes and what the computers are actually running are two different things. DevOps makes up the difference between the simple environment that developers have on their laptop and the very much more complicated environment that's actually running in the data center. A key concept in DevOps, as we practice it at FP Complete, is immutable infrastructure. Immutable means that when you deploy something, you don't change it afterwards. You get it running and you leave it alone. Now, how can this work in a world of ever-changing software? Well, in the past, it wasn't feasible. But in cloud computing, because we're able to bring up new machines anytime we want and fully automate that process, the process of creating machines, configuring them, and deploying containers and software onto them. For the first time, we're able to create brand new machines anytime we want to deploy a new version of our software. We can create new networks, new virtual private clouds, new infrastructure, new anything on demand. By creating a new version of our servers and our clouds every time we develop new software and deploy it, we're not putting new software onto old machines. We're not combining brand new components with old components that were built in different situations. That allows us to build a complete running system in our test environment, run the tests there, and then build our production environment to actually match our test environment. Automated deployment is key. If you haven't automated the deployment of software that your company is using, it's really not feasible to create new copies of the infrastructure whenever you're putting out new software. But if you have automated, it's trivially easy to bring up new copies of your application and of your cloud. That means you can really test something that looks just like the system you're going to have in production. Historically, we've described cloud infrastructure and server infrastructure as mutable. That means changeable. Someone will bring up a server and then put patches on it and put new software, new libraries, new components, new microservices, change the way it's administered. And what we end up with is a very unsecure system. In fact, an undocumented system, one in which no one really knows how that server is configured. We're running our businesses and creating confidential records, doing life or death computations on machines in an unknown state that has never been tested. We tested the software, but the software was tested on newer machines that were brought up more recently, and then it's deployed onto old machines that have been running for a long time. That's not safe. To get out of this world, we need to use automation to bring up new cloud servers, new connections between those servers, new admin facilities, monitoring facilities, even new virtual private clouds when we deploy new software. That's called immutable infrastructure, unchanging infrastructure. Not because we're using the same servers we used years ago, but just the opposite. Because once we bring up a server, we're not going to modify it later. We're just going to destroy it, throw it away, and replace it with a new server whenever we have new software. In the old world of data centers, that would be crazy. But in the world of virtual computing that runs on the cloud, that's easy. It's a few commands that can be automated to bring up new servers. Now, it's really important to understand the role of open source software in administering cloud computing. Vendor lock-in is something that most companies are worried about, and we hear from company after company the importance of being able to work on multiple clouds, not just to avoid vendor lock-in and being caught in their pricing schemes, but also because of international issues about privacy, security, pricing. And also because different clients, customers, and partners may need you to run your software on the cloud that they're using. If you build your system using too many of the features of one cloud, you may find that you're stuck on that cloud for a long time. Cloud computing is good, and the vendors out there are pretty good, but if you want to have the flexibility to move around and avoid vendor lock-in, a good solution is to build your DevOps solution using open source tools. At FP Complete, we use lots of open source tools every day, and we're big contributors to the open source community too. What we find is that open source tools are usually written in a very open-minded way that says, I don't assume you want to work with any particular vendor, I assume you want these facilities to work generically. The difficulty with open source tools comes in reinventing the wheel. Many IT managers tell us that they're using their best people to learn how to use the cloud or to learn how to use DevOps tools, and then configure them, integrate them, and deploy them. DevOps is pretty new, so it often takes a really clever person to wade through the many options that are available and figure out what your company needs. At FP Complete, because we've built out DevOps solutions working with dozens of customers with very clever people at those customers, we've been through those lessons. We've been through that learning. We've been doing DevOps for the better part of a decade, since before anyone even called it DevOps. As a result, we've learned the strengths and weaknesses of the different tools out there. When working with open source tools or cloud facilities, it's very important to understand that what the software really does may be different than what the datasheet says. A lot of programs are much better at something that they do and much worse at something else that they do, but you won't see that spelled out. So one of the things that we try to do at FP Complete is to build proven combinations of open source tools, each of which fills a certain niche, and then combine those into proven and tested deployments that you can use. Part of our job as consulting engineers is to help you get past that stage where you're burning up the time of your best people to figure out how to do DevOps, and instead letting you focus on building value for customers of yours while we focus on making sure that your team is up to speed on the latest DevOps infrastructure and the lessons learned about what works and what doesn't work.